Okay, so now is Filipa Ramos, who is editor-in-chief of Art Agenda, which many of you may be familiar with, and also she is co-founder and co-curator of Vdrome, which defines itself on its website as an online cinema. So Filipa will tell us more about the background of this project and how it functions.
Well, thank you, Maha, for the invitation, and thank you for the organization of the Sharjah Art Foundation for bringing me here. Basically, what I will do is tell a story of how an organization, how an initiative came into being, what were our motivations, what were our interests, what drove us in the beginning, and what continues to drive us, and how it exists. And differently from the first two presentations. And by the way, I'm very happy to be in a panel of only women. I think it's very nice. We actually have no physical space. That is, we all exist in one way or another, but we don't have a specific venue or a specific cinema where we happen and where our projects develop. And that was something that actually was not the initial aim or how initially we thought of coming into being, but it was something that became very clear to us while trying to think what we could become. And this because 5 years ago in 2013, an Italian-based art publication and editorial group called Mus magazine approached us. So I'm not alone. I'm doing this in dialogue with two other people, and invited us to develop an artist film festival based in Milan, because Mus is based in Milan, and they wanted, the editor of Mus wanted to develop a project based in the city, and it was exactly in a moment. Well, we're still living through it, but it was exactly in that moment in which there was a sort of regrowth of attention and enthusiasm by a large part of the curatorial, critic, and institutional approaches towards artist cinema and artist moving images in general. So there was a big interest in the art world, in the ways in which artists and filmmakers who were interested with experimenting with the formats of film were working with moving images, and Mus somehow felt that interest and thought it was a good moment to create a small film festival dedicated to artist films. Throughout our discussions, we very soon realized that despite the fact that a local and a presence is always fundamental and it's extremely important, Mus already had that, and that maybe we could try and do something that could become a sort of film festival that exists everywhere and reaches audiences and reaches viewers regardless of where they are. And we thought of doing so by taking advantage of the best that somehow the internet can offer us, which is to become a system of distribution and circulation that can reach anyone, anywhere, regardless of where they are. We just need to have an online connection. And this, somehow this decision also was largely motivated by, I mean, I remember growing up, I come from Portugal, and I remember being in Lisbon when I was studying and always feeling frustrated that the things that were being shown, the things that were happening elsewhere, and that I felt I could never see in first person, or I could only read about many of the shows, many of the projects that were being shown, and I never managed to see them. And it was exactly this desire to also go beyond this idea of centrality, of that you need to be in a certain location in order to have access to what some artists or what some people might be doing. So just distributing it, leading it everywhere, and also in doing so, allowing us to don't have a pressure of having a specific program of working with specific kinds of artists or not, just doing something that defines itself in its making. And so if on the one hand we decided that online was our circulation distribution system, on the other we still grounded ourselves as a way of functioning and as a structure in the movie theater as a space, in the sense that we decided not to have an archive. The internet is so much about accumulation, is so much about you going somewhere and then getting lost and getting inside the rabbit hole, and suddenly 10 minutes later you're somewhere else looking at something completely different. And so we decided that as a place, an online place, Vdrome would become the film that we would host, and it would have no archive of other films. And so like a cinema, if you go there for a specific limited amount of time, you would see something. And if you didn't see it in that period, it would disappear and it would be replaced by something else. So the works we shown are shown for a very specific temporality, for around 12 to 14 days. And then what remains is exactly just a memory of what was shown, and I'll go there just in a second. What also drove us in terms of program was to, and this is still the question that continues to move us, was to think what is the present and the future of moving images, and the strong belief that more than mainstream cinema, the cinema that is thinking itself and the cinema that is pushing what cinema can be is exactly that cinema that happens in dialogue with other disciplinary ambits, a cinema that is looking at art and an art that is looking at cinema and that is interested in experimenting itself. So Vdrome exactly moved, driven by that question, what is the future of cinema? And also not only of the works in themselves, but also the future of viewership, a future of cinephilia and of modes of spectatorship. No? And in that sense, we also decided to choose a name that paid tribute somehow to a visionary figure that was very interested in thinking the intercommunicability of different modes of seeing, and the title Vdrome is a tribute to Stan van der Beek's Moviedrome, no? And to his Intercom manifesto and his dream of having a dispersed community of viewers across the world. Many people sometimes ask us, "Oh, are you quoting Cronenberg's with Videodrome?" And no, we're actually referring to Stan van der Beek. At the same time as we're presenting these works, we're also very conscious that we exist online, and that materials that you put online, they gain a life of their own, and they are received in very different circumstances and moments, and that somehow they deserve to be accompanied by something that somehow frames them and helps viewers to have a better sense of what these works are about. And so once more, borrowing the system of the film premiere in a film festival, in a movie theater, we invite writers, thinkers to do short interviews, so short Q&As with the filmmakers who we are presenting. And so, and that is exactly the memory that remains that I was saying. So once a film, so the films are presented together with a conversation that you can just read below. And once they are removed from our main page, they go to our archive, and they remain the sort of this memory that I was saying. I'm just going through some of them. And so they also allow researchers, curators, programmers who maybe haven't seen these works to just flip through them and read about what they are and how they were created and so on and so forth. in doing so, what we realized is that we were contributing to create and to initiate a very curious form of community, you know? A community of people that they don't necessarily recognize one another because they meet in the same space, they go to the same events, and they gather around the space of the movie theater as a space where they recognize one another and where they talk after the films, before the films, and so on. But the community that exists dispersed and that is united by sharing moments of viewership that actually happen in a space of intimacy. I sometimes enjoy the thought that people are watching a Vdrome film in bed just before going to sleep, or at their home, or in a domestic environment, and this possibility of existing as a space of a cinema at the same time as existing in a form of ultimate intimacy is something that is exactly exploring new modes of viewership and new modes of cinephilia by reaching everyone, because in the age of, the ubiquity of places to watch moving images, this also allows us to just reach everyone everywhere. And so also rather contributing to somehow radically change the social space of the cinema and the social function of the cinema. In terms of not only viewership, but in terms of sources and in terms of references, very often people ask us, so how do you select the works? How do you think, and how do you do your research? Something that we decided was not only to look at the main art venues which function largely as also research for other curatorial projects, as large exhibitions or even art fairs, even if art fairs are the worst place to seeing moving image-based works, one because we don't have attention, the other because generally they're not properly shown. But we actually map and filter through those circuits that many of people who work in more strict curatorial approaches don't go to. So like film festivals, or film festivals who have a close interest to, or have programs that are dedicated to artists and experimental films. Also going to artist shows and courses like MA shows and degree shows, where we can see what younger people are looking at, where their mindsets are, the ways in which they're using cameras, the ways in which they're bypassing the camera by using cell phones, and so on and so forth. Also by word of mouth, and artists are the best people to just recommend works to us, and we very often have had artists who have presented their works on Vdrome and who come back to us and just ask us to suggest people to present their works. And in doing so, we are actually also going in a cross-generational way, in which in 1 week we can show a work by Pierre Huyghe or by Lawrence Wiener, and the week after we can show the work by Ben Thorpe Brown, for instance, or Banyabi, younger people, and this also allows us to just play and just have a huge freedom in terms of what to choose. And also sometimes it's a system, I think a program and an organization also functions in a way with its viewers as a form of seduction, and sometimes we see Vdrome as a way of seducing people by having a name that maybe you know, showing a film that maybe you've heard of, or an artist that you've been curious about, and 10 days later just present you with someone who is very likely to be totally unknown to you, but because you've been following what we do, you somehow built a sort of trust in us, and you're curious about what we're showing, and so you decide just to show something, to look at it and discover something different. Thinking about what to. We've had. It's interesting to think the space of the screen. I mean, I once was listening to a conversation with the Catalan filmmaker Albert Serra, and he was thinking about the screen as a space of accumulation, a space where layers and layers and layers of films are glued into one another, and so the screen becomes this like invisible deposit of history that somehow bears the memory of everything that has been projected onto it. And this is something that we also think about of the space of Vdrome as this layers and layers of films that have passed by. And sometimes this bears some problems and also makes us aware of the responsibility we have towards the films that we show. And this because I'd like to tell a curious story in terms of, because one of our aims is of course to reach new audiences and to reach viewers that don't necessarily are the ones that would come and watch artist films. And this happened in a very, one of the moments in which it happened, it was in a very strange manner. So we showed a film by, well, I was just the American conceptual artist. We showed a film by Lawrence Wiener called Water in Milk Exists, which is a film that has very explicit images. It could be considered almost, it's a pornographic film, and he's experimenting with the format of pornography. And at a certain point we had an audience growth, which was exponential. We passed from a viewership of around 3,000 to 4,000 viewers per film to having like 50,000 viewers, and we were like, what's happening? We were joking, one of us was saying, you see porn cells, and this couldn't be possible. And suddenly we understood that the film had been linked to a famous, to YouPorn, to a famous porn channel, and that suddenly, in the most unexpected way, we were reaching audiences that we were not expecting, and somehow I was hoping that these people would come back to Vdrome and discover another kind of online consuming of films. And then after this experience, we showed an incredible video by an artist called Adelita Husni-Bey. And it's a work she made with a school, with a free school in France, with kids. And we had to ask permission to all the parents of those kids to show their kids online. And so we showed postcards from the desert island, and suddenly I remember the moment which occurred to me, like, I hope those parents don't go to our archive and discover that we just showed Lawrence Wiener's films, because despite the fact that it's not there, the parents might be extremely uncomfortable by the fact that a week before there was a radical different experience of film watching going there. So this also makes us think about the responsibility of having a single space that, despite not being a space, exists and accumulates visions, and also accumulates visions that don't necessarily have a narrative, but that continue to talk to one another. But this, at the same time, as there might be this slight disadvantage, there's also the great advantage that we can go everywhere, and one of our main challenges is to be as global as possible. So despite the fact that we're based in Europe, we try and exactly to bring films from all over the world and to use the internet again to just shoot them back. And maybe we can, I'm receiving a little sign that we need to close. Maybe we can also open this afterwards.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask you, but you mentioned that somehow like it's easier for like the previous presentations. They can see their audience. It's kind of easier to know who your audience is. But in your case, it's with that exception where you do you have a sense? Like, can you get a sense of who your audience is?
I mean, we have one of the advantages that we have, I think, is that we decided to have no control. So you don't need to log in, you don't need to register in order to watch our films. It's not like there's a membership or something. You just enter and watch them. So on the one hand, with this, we lose a little bit of who the viewers are, but we can control the access to the website, and in terms of we can see where people are coming from, unless they have something that blocks their access because they don't want to be seen. We have a sense of the geography and of the times of viewership. We don't necessarily know the demographics precisely. We don't know the age groups, for instance. We suspect they're fairly young, but we don't know. But we know where where viewers are coming from and how many people look at films. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Okay, so Hania Mroué, who is the founder of Metropolis Cinema in Beirut and also of a related distribution company, MC. And also, like, I know you're a part of a long history of Beirut arts and culture scenes. You're part of many other things, like the Beirut DC, right? And so maybe you can tell us more about your background and what you're doing with Metropolis.
Hello everyone, thank you for being here and for staying. I don't have a presentation, so I will just talk. I just have a small video that I will show maybe at the end. So Metropolis is a non-profit organization that we started in 2006 in order to create an art house cinema. The first art house cinema in Lebanon, actually, and the idea came exactly from this frustration that Filipa was talking about, that if you miss the screening of a specific film at a specific time, then you know that you cannot see it anymore. So the idea was to create a certain continuity and to allow people to see films throughout the year without this frustration. So we started in a small theater of 100 seats in Hamra, and then we moved 2 years later to a bigger theater with 2 screens of 270 seats each. With time, our project developed and also our mission. So now we have 4 kinds of activities that are different but also very much related. The first activity, which is the most visible and that most people know about and which also make our reputation, is of course programming. So we program this theater all year round. We have regularly 4 shows in each theater, and we do all kind of programming. We release films commercially like other, I would say, normal cinemas, even though they are not necessarily normal, the multiplexes. But we also create lots of events, film weeks and film festivals. The reason why we do so many festivals, we have around 20 events every year, is for us an excuse to show contemporary productions from all over the world, covering as much as possible all the different genres, the different styles and cinematic approaches. But it's also a way to attract audiences, to attract press and media's attention, and eventually also sponsors and donors, if we're lucky. So just briefly, the different festivals that we organized throughout the year. We have a European Film Festival, a documentary film festival, an animation festival. We have what we call Short Night. We do it several times throughout the year. It's a screening of Lebanese shorts. We have the Ibero-American Film Week, the German Film Week, and we have a partnership with Cannes Critics Week. So we show every year in June a rerun of the entire selection of the Critics Week films that premiered just a month before in Cannes. We have Youth and Children Film Festival that we started 3 years ago. So these are the regular events that we do every year, and then beside that we have every year 1 or 2 retrospectives of renowned directors. We try to show usually the films in restored copies on DCP or 35mm, and for each retrospective we try to have a guest to present the films and to have like a talk about the work of the filmmaker. We did many retrospectives, Tati, Bresson, Romer, Bergman, Kiarostami, like many. And in summer we do open air screenings with several venues around the city that we have partnership with. So these are our events, but at the same time we host a lot of other festivals that we do not organize ourselves, like Human Rights Film Festival, Fantastic Film Festival, Extreme Sports, Beirut International, Arab Film, whatever. So all these festivals happen in our venue. We have around 70,000 spectators a year that come to our cinema. So this is the biggest activity that we have. The second, which is for me the most important, and it's really at the core of our mission, it's the educational programs that we do. We work a lot with schools, both public and private schools. We work with NGO that deal with children with special needs. We work in refugee camps, Palestinian refugee camps, but also Syrian settlements. And we try as much as possible to bring the kids to our cinema, and when we cannot bring them, we go to their region or to their place where they live, and we organize screenings there. It's really, these programs take a lot of time because it has to be very carefully prepared according to the age group, but also we have to take into consideration the social context in which they live, the level of education, the language problem. So for each film, we prepare a dossier pédagogique, a pedagogical document, yes, that we send to the animators or the teachers to prepare the screenings with the kids beforehand, and to also be able to have like a short Q&A with the children after the screening. We have around 25,000 children that we reach every year, and during the youth festival that happens at Metropolis, we invite all these people to come to the cinema to watch the screenings, and we organize also workshops for them, acting, filming, Foley and sound, puppet making, animation, and these workshops are all free of charge, and we invite kids from different backgrounds to participate and work together during these workshops. The third activity that we do is more industry oriented. So we have two major trainings that we do every year. The first one is for technicians, for cinematographers, sound designers, score composers, and editors. We do this workshop in partnership with the Berlinale Talents. It's every year in September, and it's open to participants from the Arab world. It tackles both technical but also theoretical approaches of this métier, this craft practice. Yes, exactly. The second training that we do is something that we're starting now, actually next week. It's a training for emerging programmers and distributors from the region. And this training, we're doing it in partnership with the Locarno Film Festival and particularly the Locarno Industry Academy. So yes, we have this year 12 participants, and we're very much looking forward to this new initiative. Beside that, we have master classes that we do throughout the year, and we invite filmmakers but also technicians to come and talk about their work. We've had people like Jacques Audiard, Costa Gavras, Joshua Oppenheimer, but also Akram Zatari, Raed Andouni, to come and present their work and have like it's an open session. It's open to the public, and usually it's full house. The fourth and last activity that we do is a little bit too ambitious for us. And we've been, since the beginning, we've been working a lot and dealing a lot with film heritage. And this comes from a need and a frustration that is, I think, not only in Lebanon, but also in the region, that we don't have a national cinematheque or any film archive or any resource center where people can have access to at least information about the films that are being produced, that are being screened, that tour the world, get awards everywhere, and then they vanish. So, for instance, students don't even have access to films that were produced like 10 years ago. So we decided to start this project that is Cinematheque Beirut. We don't have right now the means to start a physical space to do restoration, conservation, exhibitions. So we decided to start with an online database about Lebanese cinema, something like IMDb, something where you can get all kinds of information about Lebanese productions, actors, technicians, publications, Yeah, so we're going to put all that online, and the launching of this project is in June, inshallah, if all goes well. Yeah, that's it. So
That's great.
there's a small video that we did for our 10th anniversary that we can just show, just to give you an idea what the place looks like if you want.
So it's mainly a database of Lebanese films, or not necessarily?
Yes, it's Lebanese films. With Beirut DC, because also, as you said, I'm a founding member of the Beirut DC association that organizes the Ayyam Beirut Cinema Ayyam Film Festival. We had started 10 years ago a database for Arab cinema, and we had collected data about 10,000 films. But it was funded by the EU, and then when the funding stopped, we didn't have the means to keep it, updated. So now we are starting this new database, and hopefully we will be able to sustain it over the years, because that's also like a major problem of all the projects that we start is the sustainability. Yes, I have it here. You want
Yeah. So as far as I understand, we have like 10 more minutes left, or how?
10 minutes for discussion and Q&A.
Okay. And the videos, how long? Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, so we don't have a lot of time for the discussion. I'll try to just maybe ask one question and then open it up for to the audience. It's hard to kind of wrap this up because of the depth and breadth of the different projects that were presented. But just one question maybe that comes to mind, maybe from my kind of background and practice is, like we get now like more of an idea of the kind of content that you are programming, what you aim to do, but what is often not visible is kind of the things that you're pushing against in the background, like for example, the kind of legal framework or political framework that you're working within, for example. So I was, curious to know what kind of this kind of work that is often takes, like of course maybe it's different in terms of an online platform, but you have a lot of your work, a big percentage goes into just creating the possibility of existence, no, in the different contexts. So I was curious to hear a little bit about that, if you.
It's a very difficult question to sum up in the time frame that we have, because I mean there's a multitude in the context that we operate in here in Dubai of different challenges of setting up a space. So we've been around for 4 years, and from day one our objective was to set up a space, to set up a brick and mortar house, a 100-seater for art house cinema. And to this date we haven't been able to get the necessary paperwork in order to do that. So it's allowed us to also maneuver around these restrictions and to establish the nomadic practice, but that was also a result of necessity and a result of insistence on showcasing these films. So ideally from day one we would have had the space where we're monetizing and distributing and releasing and activating the space in the way that an art house, I think, shelter works. But in the absence of that, in the absence of regulations, we've had to revise a lot of our practices. So bureaucratically and technically, there's that hurdle that we're still pushing back against. And
so you're not kind of registered as a cinema, you function more as an art project?
We are registered as a cinema. It took a while for us to register as a cinema, considering that there were no cinemas in the zoning area that we were deciding to place ourselves. So it would have been much easier to, and we were invited by different developments that were coming up around the city to set up a space that would mirror what we're trying to do, but we insisted on being in Al Sarkal Avenue and being in Al Quoz, and that insistence has kind of forced our hand in many ways, but also allowed us the freedom to exist under the radar and to also tap into an audience space that perhaps would not have gravitated to other developments. So there's that kind of bureaucratic aspect. There's, from a content point of view, everybody's favorite word, the censorship question, and that is something, that is a reality we grapple with. It is something that, with every single, film that could be read as controversial, it is something that we have to think about. We have to get licenses for the films that we show. Sometimes, we try to circumvent these restrictions, and we successfully are able to do that. And other times, depending on where we are, we have to make a call with every single venue. What kind of action are we going to push? So there's that element. There's a commercial element, which makes our existence very precarious, because we're not registered as a nonprofit. It's very difficult to register as a nonprofit in the UAE. You can set up a professional organization or you can set up a charity, but an art house cinema sort of license requires a very different set of sort of commercial and financial commitments, which forces us to take the route of the projects like the markets and other sort of corporate screenings and things like that we have to sort of find a way to to be able to operate. We're a team of 2 people, so I don't know if I mentioned that before. So that's there's organizational sort of restrictions that come with that, and that's sort of the the desire to have the brick and mortar. Forget the institutional element of of setting up an organization. It's the actual freedom to to not think about the logistics of having to set up a cinema every single time we run a program. So that kind of puts some limitations on us, just organizationally and from a content point of view. So those are some of the things that we work with.
Working. Is it working now? Yeah, it is. I do think that despite not having a physical presence, I think that some of the challenges that we face and some of the struggles that we have, the ones that are shared by everyone, and for us, for instance, a big one is dealing with budgets, no? Because from the beginning, we decided not to have any publicity and not to have any kind of visible sponsorship on Vdrome. And this was a bit of a challenge because being hosted by an art magazine, the temptation of having a sponsorship by commercial galleries was big from their side, and we resisted also not to allow ourselves to just make a selection that was not based with in artists that are very integrated and established in the commercial circuit now, so that we could cross through that. And so struggling to pay fees. I remember recently reading a text by Herm Farocki in which he was mentioning, he was writing about workers leaving the factory, and he's saying, well, labor remains still invisible in film to a certain extent. And with all the respect and huge admiration I have for Farocki, I was like, no, labor is film in a way. There is labor, and this labor should be acknowledged, because it's not only film about labor, it's also the fact that every film that you make, everyone who works in the different sections of it are working in one way or another and should be retributed for that, no? And our big challenge and fault, for instance, is the fact that the fees that we can afford are ridiculous, you know? And this is the big embarrassment I have. Also because many of the artists that we're showing, exactly because they don't show in commercial galleries, they live from these fees, and this is the most embarrassing part of Vdrome. So how can we, and I guess it's the same for, how can we manage to be viable from a financial point of view without making compromises? Or this for us, for instance, is it's one of the big difficulties and questions that we have.
But how are you solving it a little bit?
I mean, we've had the most interesting sponsorships. We were sponsored by a museum in Detroit being a city that, as we know, is bankrupt. And then we had a sponsor who actually approached us from Greece. Greece also being known as not the wealthiest. I think Portugal will be next, and I'll find something there. So we've been having like very generous and small sponsorships that have allowed us to go on. And then sometimes happens, well, Mariana Vecello is here from Castello di Rivoli, and a museum asked us to contribute for a big program they were doing, and the fee they're giving us is exactly going to allow us to continue. So whenever we're invited to do something, we use that fee to assure our long life.
Thank you.
Everything has been said, but financial and censorship, yes, I think these are basically. But I don't think that you need to really think beforehand about the context and about preparing the background or pushing boundaries. These are not things that, at least from my experience, I don't really think about it. I just we start a project because there's a need. And then once it exists, it becomes a burden for all the authorities, and they need to deal with us as much as we need to deal with them. So, for instance, we tried for 10 years to work on a project to change the censorship law in Lebanon. We were 9 organizations. We had lawyers working with us. We had really very good support, but we failed to change the censorship law. But on the other hand, because we are here and because we program so many festivals and because we have to submit every single film, even if it's a 1-minute film, to the censorship, they couldn't deal with it anymore. So they started to, create some detours to deal with us. And so now the procedure is much easier than it used to be a few years ago, but without us having to, think about it or plan it, it just happened. Yeah.
But these are like informal detours. They're not like, they have not become legislation.
not legislations, but the whole censorship is not legal anyway. Yes.
Oh, that's good.
Very quickly, we got a grant for about 8 months of work, and we stretched that for 3 years. At the end of the money sort of drying up, we very happily ended. Because I think in our case, people wanted to kind of turn this into a fleet of rickshaws that would be like a brand, and you could call a rickshaw, it would show up and do a cinema in front of your house. And some of those entrepreneurs who came to us were very, very, very excited about the possibilities of something like this. And the resistance was to those kind of entrepreneurial models, because I don't think we wanted to turn into a service that would allow all of these advertisers and groups to access new new people as commodities, as consumers. And that would be kind of like giving up the integrity of the relationships that we built. So it's a very different kind of thing than building audiences the way that you guys work, which is a very difficult and different case. In our case, it was more of an experimental art project, which had we were fine with it ending and not being sustainable, because that's what the nature of the work was. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for this very nice discussion. And I want to open up the floor for any questions from the audience. Maybe just one. There's not much time, but yeah. But yeah, go ahead.
Hello. I just want to respond to the Karachi project because I relate to that project because I come from that similar kind of neighborhood. What I find it little problematic as artists, when we work with social or public space, we assume that people generally have good intentions. So we don't talk about the conflict between individuals. We don't talk about the conflict between families, between neighborhood. We don't talk about the censorship which we imposed on ourselves. We only talk about the censorship which states impose on the people. Those are the dynamics which is very complicated to deal with when, as artists, we work in the public domain. Second thing is, which brings me back to one slide which you showed. That's the mobile shop where they repair mobile, and you said that how they circulate material. So I will give you a very specific and very interesting example in Delhi. Recently, they discovered a network where, that kind of shops, where they share rape porn, lot of porn films, lot of propaganda films, lot of violence images, sexist, racist, lot of images circulated, those kind of network and those kind of, where there is no mapping, there is no control. I'm not talking from the state's perspective. I'm studying it, and I think those kind of neighborhood is very complex to decode it. It's not a pleasant experience to work. So I think we should be more careful and talk about those dynamics rather than making a beautiful image of the society.
So I don't think we were trying to decode any neighborhood. And there were plenty of conflicts that happened in the process of working. The project was a very long project. It's hard to talk about it in 20 minutes or less. Images tend to look beautiful anyway, but I think that the nature of public space is complex. It's riddled with issues. It's riddled with ethical problems, like you point out. I don't think that we are sort of glossing over some of those issues. There was a screening we had in which a fight broke out between what can and cannot be shown by somebody who was single when she made a film, and then on that screening day, her fiancé showed up, and he's like, I'm not going to have my fiancé's video to be shown. Things happen like that, but it's not about being beautiful or ugly per se. It's about the complexity of relationships formed with people and working in space. So whether a corner shop is doing something illegal, which happens most of the times, you have pirate industries all over cities like Karachi, Delhi, We're not trying to make it seem like present a photograph or kind of make transparent these communities. In fact, I think we resist the making of transparency in our project. I think most of it is about opacity and about not presenting a beautiful picture to an audience. So I don't know, I don't agree that these are beautiful pictures. You haven't seen, I haven't shown that many pictures per se.
Yeah, it's a shame that we weren't able to see the films themselves, because then you see what people gave you rather than what you went to, kind of the context that you went to create. Or and yeah, I guess any project kind of in itself shows partly your approach, what you sought to do, but also what was given back to you. And on that other side, there's also sharing or withholding, and it's kind of, it goes kind of both ways. Of course, there's the power of approaching with a project, with a fund to a certain neighborhood, but then there is a dance of give and take, you know, that is not necessarily very visible, but then after you see maybe many films, you will get to see how that happens.
Go on our website and look at the project a little bit more if interested.
Yeah. Very sorry that we can't take more, but maybe we can like ask you questions outside. Yeah, thank you very much.